Hey everyone, my name is Jim and I'm one of the writers, researchers here at True Crime Grapple. First, I want to thank all of you for your continued support of Dan and the show. We've shown a lot of growth over the last couple of weeks, and it's all thanks to you, the listeners. It is so important that you now take the next step and go and rate and review the show at iTunes so we can continue to grow. Then you can brag to all your friends that you were on board at the beginning and have the proof. Second, I'd like to ask all of you to go and support my other endeavor. When I'm not writing for True Crime Grapple, I'm helping people plan Disney vacations. It's an odd combination, I know, but it's a lot of fun. But I don't just do Disney trips. It's really any kind of trip you can imagine, big or small. All-inclusive beach resorts, cruises, sporting events, really just about anything. And, best of all, my travel services are completely free to my clients. So, to find out more, go to Facebook and like my page, at James Pitts, Key to the World Travel. I'm sure Dan will be kind enough to put a link in the show notes. And if you're interested in the new Star Wars lands at Disneyland or Walt Disney World, or Disney Cruise, or just about any other trip, send me a message and let me know that you heard us here on True Crime Grapple. Thank you.
And welcome to episode 24 of the True Crime Grapple Show, and I'm your host Dan. So right off the bat, at the time of recording this, there's no new iTunes reviews to report or to read out, so I'm making again a little pledge to you all to just take a few minutes to give us a nice 5-star rating and leave a review. Seriously guys and gals, I go on about it, but our downloads are increasing week by week, and that's down to a few things. Word of mouth and ratings and reviews. But thank you all for your continued support otherwise. Now sadly, although thankfully not permanently, our music and sound editor BaBaBeats is off for a while as he's about to become a father for a second time. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to wish him and his beautiful better half all the best for their new bundle of joy on the way. The bad news off the back of this is that unfortunately I will have to edit the shows till he gets back, so I'm giving you an apology in advance for that. It might not be too pretty, but I'll do my best. Don't forget, you can leave a voicemail for the show. Now, the number to call from inside the US is 302 468 7477. That's 302 468 7477. Save it in your phone, and if you're calling from outside the US, then just stick a +1 in front of the 302. Don't forget to also join us on our socials. They are in the show notes, and do enjoy the show today. Now, episode 24 is narrated by me, Dan Kelton. It's written by Lauren Daryani, and for the last time for a little while, the music and editing is by BaBaBeats. So let's do this. Lock that door, sit back and relax, because it's true crime time. For millennia, the human mind has simultaneously been pulled in two directions. One that strives for self-understanding, and one that succumbs to animal instinct. It's been said that the rich world of human emotion can be divided into four very basic categories. Happiness, sadness, anger, fear. While new studies have emerged in order to weigh in on the controversial idea that animals share the same emotions as humans, few people can deny that fear is one of our most primal emotions, shared by virtually every living creature. It is most essentially born from the need to protect oneself in an environment that is perceived as unfamiliar or dangerous, and so it's intrinsically linked with the sense of self-preservation. One of the uniquely human ways that we experience such a fundamental emotion as fear is to actively pursue it for the thrill that it gives us. With hearts pounding, quick breathing and profuse sweating, humans are not only entertained by the fear of facing what's unknown or predictable, but also achieve a satisfaction from the triumph of overcoming a fearful situation. Those fearful situations can range from skydiving and base jumping to more passive pastimes as reading about true crime or the paranormal. The horror genre is especially rich soil for those who like to be entertained through scares. It encapsulates a wide range of entities who play on our most primal fears. Figures deeply ingrained in folklore and fairy tales, such as vampires, werewolves and witches and ghosts, are reincarnated repeatedly from generation to generation. Urban legends and newer monsters in the form of serial killers have captivated the modern mind, along with the possibility of extraterrestrial life that has added another dimension to our fear of the unknown. The horror genre has found the perfect niche with the advent of cinema. Since as early as the 1890s, the movie camera has pushed the boundaries of human imagination. As a new medium for entertainment and storytelling, the motion picture meticulously coordinated sights and sounds in ways that stirred the deepest of human emotions, naturally including. Just as with oral folklore or written word, the horror film has provided for its viewers an escape from the mundane, everyday world into the darkest recesses of the human mind. But a medium such as film has made it difficult for even modern viewers to discern between what is fact and what is fiction, and through more impressionable viewers, life will often imitate art. The horror genre has had the unsavoury reputation of inspiring countless criminal acts by troubled and predatory individuals who have taken their fanaticism to a violent level. In 1981, a woman had stabbed her 4-year-old daughter multiple times before cutting out her heart, with her defence during trial claiming that she was influenced by a television airing of The Exorcist. In 2006, a man slashed his friend with multiple sharp blades attached to a gardening glove, fashioned after Freddy Krueger's gloved hand from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. The friend fortunately survived. That same year, Idaho teenager Cassie Jo Stoddart would join the long list of people who have fallen victim to the delusions of horror movie fans. Only she wouldn't be so lucky to survive. Cassie's murder brings attention to the fact that horror movie villains walk amongst us every day. Beyond the safety of our television and movie projector screens, there are real-life monsters whose thrills come from not experiencing fear, but from instilling it into other individuals, often with deadly consequences. This is the case when the media would descend upon a quiet, wholesome town in Idaho to bring national attention to what for years would be known as the Scream Murder. Cassie Jo Stoddart was born on December 1st, 1989 in Pocatello. She was a middle child among 3 children. Her sister Christy, who was 7 years older and had already moved out, and also her brother Andrew, who was a year and a half younger. Occasionally, family issues and life difficulties would bring Cassie and her brother to be raised by their maternal grandparents when they were younger. Though Christy was the oldest, Andrew looked up to Cassie more and considered her more of a role model. They were just a grade apart in school, so naturally they would become close, sharing the same interests and going to the same places. By the time she was a junior in Pocatello High School, Cassie and Andrew were living back at home with their mother Anna and Anna's long-term boyfriend Victor. At 16 years old, she was a typical teenager. She was outgoing and kind, funny and well liked by her peers. Instead of engaging in drugs and alcohol or attending parties, Cassie was known to be responsible, intelligent and studious, and she made straight A's in her classes. She had ambitions for the future, which included going to college and pursuing a career in law. Cassie had an artistic streak with a special fondness for drawing and music. She decorated the walls in her bedroom with her favourite artist's work, while her mother decorated her house in Cassie's original artwork. Cassie was hoping to save up for a car, and one of the ways she earned extra money was to do jobs typical of girls her age whenever she could. Her aunt and uncle, Alison and Frank Contreras, had just moved from California with their 2 teenage daughters and 5-year-old son to Idaho about a year before, and Cassie would often babysit their son. Their split-levelled residence in West Whispering Cliffs Drive had been a drastic change from the hustle and bustle of the Bay Area. Occupying a 1.5-acre lot north of Pocatello, on the outskirts of town, the Contreras residents enjoyed a little more privacy than that was found in the average suburban neighbourhood. The front of the home was set far back from the road. The backyard opened up to fenced pastures and a creek, and the neighbouring homes were more than just a few paces away. Although the Contreras family resided in Idaho, Frank worked for a construction company in Jackpot, Nevada, located 3 hours away. Alison and the kids hoped to spend the weekend of Friday the 22nd of September with him and return home with him on the Sunday. With 3 cats and 2 dogs to tend to, they were lucky to have a niece as responsible as Cassie to keep the house in order while they were away. They asked Cassie to house sit for them Friday and Saturday night. Cassie naturally agreed. Friday, September 22nd was just a typical day in Pocatello High School. As she rearranged her school books in her locker, Cassie Jo Stoddart was greeted by her classmate Brian and his video camera. She had gotten to be friends with him while goofing off in class, but she kept her interaction with him brief that morning. Just a few more hours and she'd be able to relax from the constraints of her school schedule for a couple of days. House sitting gave her the opportunity to get away from home, and making extra cash in the process was a nice bonus. She was excited at the thought of getting a car and gaining a bit more freedom as other kids her age got to have. She was already in the midst of completing a driver's education course. Cassie also looked forward to spending some quality time with her boyfriend, Matt Beckham. Matt had accompanied her during house-sitting gigs in the past, but she always made sure to get permission first before inviting him over to her aunt and uncle's home. She had known Matt since her junior high, but they had only become a couple recently, spending a lot of their time at Cassie's house. That afternoon, around 5:30 p.m, Cassie's mother Anna gave her a ride to the house in Whispering Cliffs. Matt also joined them, seeing as he didn't have his own mode of transportation. Anna would call later in the evening to check up on the couple, and Cassie would confirm that Matt was still with her and that they were okay. The couple invited a schoolmate, Matt's close friend, Tori Adamcik, to hang out with them for the evening. When Tori arrived around 8:20 p.m, he had brought along his friend Brian Draper, who had videotaped Cassie earlier that morning. Like Cassie and Matt, Tori and Brian were 16-year-old juniors at Pocatello High School. Earlier in the week, the couple had talked about having a party, but Tori and Brian were the only ones who'd shown up. Upon entering, the two boys were eager to take a look around the house. Brian was known to act immature and a bit reckless, so Cassie and Matt followed him to make sure they didn't break anything in the house. Going from room to room, they eventually wound up downstairs in the basement and then in the garage, where they fooled around with a universal weight machine. Afterwards, the group decided to watch a movie together. Tori selected Kill Bill Volume 2 from the film library, and they headed back upstairs with the popsicles they found in the freezer. For a while, the four friends were content to watch the movie, but soon Tori and Adam grew bored and restless. They'd expected more of a party atmosphere. By 9:30, Brian said he needed to go home. Tori was his ride and was getting ready to leave with him. Before they left the house, Matt made tentative plans with Tori to stay the night at Tori's house. If Matt's mother was okay with it, Tori would have to come back and pick him up. After his friends left between 9:45 and 10 p.m, Matt called his mother for permission, but she refused his request. She planned to pick him up that night from Whispering Cliffs because of a surprise she had waiting for him. Matt called Tori to let him know that he couldn't stay the night after all. Tori responded in whispers, saying that he was at a movie. Matt told him that there was no need to come back to the house to pick him up. After about 15 minutes of watching television together, the couple's comfort was disrupted when the electricity suddenly went out, plunging the entire house into darkness and silence. Cassie and Matt tried various light switches, but none would work. There seemed to be no explanation for the outage. There was no storm. Nothing in the house seemed to trip the breaker. Cassie was becoming frightened at the prospect of staying alone in a large pitch-dark house on the edge of town, and Matt himself was becoming uneasy with the situation. It didn't help that one of the dogs was clearly agitated. The dog stared and barked at the basement door, located in the kitchen area, and then took a seat near Cassie and Matt. Moments later, he would do the same thing again and several times more. It was as if there was someone else in the house with them. The breaker box was located downstairs, but instead of going to investigate, Matt and Cassie waited. 15 minutes later, the electricity came back on, but only in the hallway and at an outlet that powered the cordless phone. At around 11 p.m, Matt called his mother again. The electricity was out in the house and he wanted to see if Cassie could leave with him for the night, but Cassie declined. She felt the need to stay and fulfill her responsibility as house sitter for her aunt and uncle. Besides, she had already been paid by them up front. At around 11:30 p.m, Matt's mother arrived to pick him up. As Matt walked to his mother's car, he realised what the surprise was. His father, who'd spent some time in a rehabilitation facility, had gotten out earlier than expected and was waiting in the car to greet him. The couple said their goodbyes, and Matt was off, leaving Cassie alone to house sit in the dark. On the evening of Sunday, September 24th, the Contreras family returned home from their trip. Cassie's 13-year-old cousin was happy to finally arrive at the house. Her immediate family was together again, and she couldn't wait to see if Cassie was still home so they could hang out with each other. She was the first one to make it inside, using one of the entry doors from inside the garage. None of the doors were secured, but this didn't seem to be of any concern. At the base of the stairs that led into the main living quarters, Cassie's cousin found a large amount of broken glass. After climbing the stairs, she dropped her bags off in her room and followed the sound of the television into the living room. That's when she saw Cassie. She screamed for her dad, who was still unloading the car, telling him that she believed Cassie was dead. Frank then rushed to the living room and saw his niece's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. Cassie's Aunt Alison made the call to the police. She told the 911 operator that she found the body of her niece lying in blood, cold to the touch and not breathing, her stomach bloated. Per the operator's instructions, she left the house to wait for police. Throughout the weekend, Cassie's mother had tried to get in touch with Cassie. On Saturday morning, she drove with her boyfriend to redeem some coupons at the casino in Fort Hall and then spent that afternoon with her mother. By Saturday night, she knew that Matt wasn't with Cassie. He called the house hoping to finally get through to her. On Sunday, it was the same story. Anna and Victor had cooked a late breakfast and then visited with neighbours. By 1:30 in the afternoon, there was still no sign of Cassie. Surely they would have heard from her by then. They then decided to drive to the Contreras household. Anna pulled up to her sister's house with Victor, only to find relatives and neighbours gathered in the front lawn and across the street from the house. Frank rushed to tell them that Cassie might be dead. Victor went into the house first, attempting to keep the sight of Cassie's body far from her mother's eyes. It made no difference, and Anna became hysterical and fell to the ground in anguish at the knowledge of what had happened to her daughter. She suddenly remembered that Matt was the last person to be seen with Cassie. She then called him up and screamed, "What the fuck did you do to my daughter?" The investigation into Cassie Jo Stoddart's murder was a joint effort among the Bannock County Sheriff's Office, the Pocatello Police and the Idaho State Police. Deputy Karen Hatch arrived at the Contreras residence first and was followed by 2 paramedics. They traced the steps that Cassie's cousin and uncle took when they first entered the house, going through the garage, up the stairs and to the living room. Deputy Coroner Kim Quick was contacted after the paramedics determined that Cassie had undergone livor mortis, where blood accumulates and pools in the most gravity-dependent portion of the deceased body. Idaho State Police officers Roche and Barnes arrived at the home and secured it until Detective Tony Vollmer could take over the investigation from the Bannock County Sheriff's Department and cordon the property off to the public. Throughout the course of the day, multiple police, court and forensic personnel, as well as paramedics and even a Catholic priest, passed through the Contreras household. Cassie's maternal uncle, grandparents and great-grandparents ultimately joined the scene. They stayed at a neighbour's house across the street as the authorities carefully began their investigation of the Contreras residence into the evening. Detective Vollmer conducted a briefing at 3:45 p.m. to identify the crime scene team that would conduct a preliminary walkthrough. Detective Andy Thomas was named as case agent, who worked just below Vollmer. The rest of the team was comprised of Detectives Don Wyckoff, Bill Collins, Tom Sellers and Alex Hamilton. After a half hour, the detectives embarked on their investigations of the house. The detectives began on the bottommost floor via the garage, just as Cassie's cousin had entered. They took note of the large amount of glass that she first discovered at the foot of the stairwell. They ascended the stairs, marking with placards the 3 bloodstains that soaked the carpeted treads. After searching the wing of the house containing the kitchen, they took the hallway that would lead them to the other wing, finding more bloodstains in the carpet along the way. In the bathroom, a condom was found in the toilet bowl and stains were found in the sink that couldn't be identified. A children's bedroom revealed that one of the dogs had been locked up. Their last stop was the living room, where they came upon Cassie lying in front of the television, wearing a white tank top and yellow pajama bottoms with suns, moons and stars on them. She was lying on her back with her arms raised above her head and slightly bent at the elbows. Her body was riddled with numerous deep lacerations and cuts. It was apparent she was attacked repeatedly with a knife, with the majority of injuries directed mercilessly at her chest, neck and back, including one in the centre of her chest. Her left leg had an apparent knife wound, and her left pinky had almost been completely severed off. Blood was all over the living room, and it was clear that a struggle had ensued after a brutal attack had begun. The detectives marked the bloodstains that surrounded her body, and more placards were set out. There was a Sony PlayStation in front of the television, and it was evident that at some point Cassie's right foot had gotten entangled in the power cord connecting the two. A cordless phone was lying just beside her body. The investigators found that the blood in the steps leading downstairs indicated that it was dropping as it moved away from Cassie and headed downstairs to the entrance leading outside. In a corner of the garage and set in the wall just above a small table and chair set was a breaker box that controlled the power to the house. Its panel door had been left swung open. The initial walkthrough lasted just over an hour and a half and concluded around 6 p.m. Detective Hamilton began to take photos of the evidence and log it, working his way from outside the home inwards. Many pieces of evidence were documented, most of which were bloodstains found in areas such as the floor, a throw rug, along the stairs, on the entry door frame, behind the television, and below a window. All of it silently telling the story of just how violently Cassie was killed. The motive clearly was not robbery, as nothing of value had been taken, nor was the house rifled through for any personal belongings. The murder weapon was also nowhere to be found. At this point, there was nothing Cassie's family could do but wait for the details and clues to emerge about who committed the murder. Anna and Victor's car, as well as the Contreras', were to stay put while the authorities continued their investigations. As Detective Vollmer took Anna and Victor home, Anna's phone was inundated with calls and messages from those who had found out about what had happened to her daughter. Upon dropping Anna and Victor off at the house, Detective Vollmer conducted a quick search of Cassie's room and recovered a cell phone as well as her journal in hopes that it would provide any relevant information regarding her murder. The Bannock County Sheriff's Office helped to provide temporary housing for the Contreras family, and for 2 weeks they stayed at a hotel as the investigation was conducted at their home. Bannock County Sheriff Lauren Nielsen also helped them to pay the home insurance deductible in order to begin the clean-up of the crime scene. It didn't matter by that point. No amount of cleaning could remove the memory of what had happened that Friday evening, and the house could no longer be a home for the Contrerases. The living room where Cassie was found had a feeling of emptiness, and it was never occupied again for the remainder of the family's stay. For years after, they would struggle with selling the home. Every year they would put the house up on the market, and every year no offers were made. No one wanted to live in a house where such a violent, senseless tragedy had occurred. At around 10:30 p.m, Cassie's body was finally taken from the Contreras residence, yet for the next several hours the house would be teeming with investigators as they continued the investigation. By 2 a.m. the next morning, they had secured the scene for the night and took the evidence collected to the sheriff's office, where Detective Vollmer and fellow detective Mark Ballard labelled and sealed the evidence. The effects of Cassie's death on her family and friends were profound and unique. Cassie's cousin was so emotionally distraught from finding her body that she suffered a mental breakdown and eventually tried to commit suicide. The Contreras family separated. Cassie's aunt, who stayed in the home with her son, also became severely depressed and needed a second job just to help pay for her medication. Cassie's 15-year-old brother Andrew had stayed over at a friend's house the night Cassie had been killed. He received the news from Victor, his mother's boyfriend. The person he looked up to was taken from him, and he was so deeply distraught that he couldn't return to school for weeks. It would be nearly a decade before he felt he could talk openly about his sister's murder. The community was shocked that such a tragedy could occur to such a sweet girl and in such a quiet, unassuming town like theirs. Sheriff Nielsen recognised Cassie's murder as one of the worst incidents to take place in the area, noting the utter senselessness of it. The Pocatello High School Art Club painted a mural portraying Cassie in front of the school, an appropriate way to memorialise their friend who loved art so much. Days after Cassie's murder, funeral services would be held at St Anthony's Chapel in Pocatello, where 500 visitors came along. Joining the family members, friends and classmates who knew her well were those who never met her but were still deeply touched by the tragedy. Students from other schools came to share in the event. Sheriff Nielsen attended the services with his officers in order to show her the respect that they knew she deserved. Cassie Jo Stoddart would be laid to rest in Mountain View Cemetery in Pocatello on September 30th, 2006. After Deputy Hatch took up written statements from the Contreras family, Cassie's mother and aunt told her that they thought Cassie's boyfriend, Matt Beckham, was supposed to stay with her while she house sat on the Friday evening. Anna knew Matt to be the last person she'd seen with her daughter and had no idea about the circumstances of him leaving her by the end of the night. She simply recalled dropping them both off at her sister's house and then calling Cassie around 9 PM to make sure they were both there and okay. Two detectives from the crime scene team, Case Agent Andy Thomas of the Bannock County Sheriff's Office and Detective John Gansky of the Idaho State Police, brought Matt and his mother to the Pocatello Police Department for questioning. They had sought out Matt as a prime person of interest in the case. He was the last person to be seen with Cassie, and it wasn't unusual for a victim's attacker to be someone linked to them personally, often romantically. Upon learning Cassie's fate, he seemed to be unusually unresponsive and emotional for someone who had been close to Cassie for so long. Despite the suspicious circumstances and his demeanour, Matt made every effort to help the detectives. He was more than willing to take a polygraph test, and he passed with no problems. He gave detectives all the information he could and helped to establish a timeline of the night's events. He gave approximate times as he detailed how he'd gone with Cassie to her aunt's house, how they played host to a couple of their classmates, how those classmates left to find other ways to fill their Friday evening, and how the electricity was acting up as he was calling his mother to form new plans for the night. He talked about the surprise he got when his mother pulled up to the Contreras residence with his father newly released from rehab in tow. They had not been fighting or arguing recently, nor was there any kind of tension between him and Cassie when he saw her alive for the last time that night. After leaving Cassie, Matt and his family arrived back at their North Pocatello apartment, where his father read to them from a book about his experience of going through rehab. They watched The Rookie together and then The Green Mile. Matt then went to his room around 3 and 3:30 AM to sleep. On Saturday, Matt made several failed attempts to contact Cassie by phone. At one point, he got in touch with Cassie's mum, but she couldn't get in touch with Cassie either. Matt had made plans to have a sleepover at Tori's house, and between 7 and 8 PM that evening, Tori picked him up. During the evening, Matt asked Tori to take him by the Contreras household so he could make sure Cassie was okay. Tori would have been happy to oblige if it weren't for his need to conserve the fuel in his car for the week. It was clear that any more time spent looking into Matt as a suspect would have been a waste of the authorities' time and resources. His mother confirmed the alibi, and call records also helped to corroborate his story, which now provided them with 2 new leads. That same day, Detectives Thomas and Gansky headed out to the residences of Tori Adamcik and Brian Draper, where they were questioned regarding their whereabouts on the night of Cassie's murder. Both had the same story. They went to Cassie's aunt's house upon her and Matt's invitation, believing there was going to be a small party, but no one else had shown up. After an hour, and partly into watching a movie with Cassie and Matt, the boys left to watch a movie at the local theatre instead. It was too late in the night to see the movie they'd originally intended to see, so they bought tickets to watch the horror movie Pulse. The investigators went to the movie theatre to interview employees. The girl who worked the ticket booth on Friday was a student at Pocatello High School who happened to know Brian Draper. She also knew that he wasn't at the movie theatre that night, or she surely would have seen him. The investigators conducted another interview with Brian, but this time at the Pocatello Police Headquarters. His story was the same, repeating that they'd left Cassie's aunt's house and watched Pulse in the theatres. They asked Brian to recall some details of the movie, such as the pilot or who starred in it, but he didn't seem to know anything about it. He remembered being really bored there, though he and Tori stayed at the theatre for 2 hours. The investigators wondered how a kid who had sat through an entire movie just several days before managed not to know a single thing about it. It became apparent to them that Brian was lying about where he was when his classmate was being murdered, but that wasn't enough to charge him with anything, so they let him go. Detectives Thomas and Gansky brought Tori Adamcik into the police department for another interview. Tori admitted that they didn't go to the movies that night after all. He and Brian drove to Cassie's aunt's house and stayed for a while, but when they left, they spent the rest of the night going through random cars, checking if they were unlocked to take money and other valuables from them. Afterwards, Brian stayed the night at Tori's house. When asked, Tori struggled to provide a description of the cars they'd gone through. Just as with Draper, the investigators knew Tori was lying to them. Before the investigators could interview Tori for a third time, Brian came back to the police department, upset and crying. His parents were with him and they also looked distressed. Brian wanted to speak to the investigators and had a news story to tell them about the night Cassie had died. He talked about how he and Tori went to the house on Whispering Cliffs. They first toured the house and then watched a movie with Cassie and Matt. At some point during the movie, Brian excused himself to go to the bathroom, but instead of going to the bathroom, he went to the entry door he spotted in the basement during their earlier tour of the house and unlocked it to sneak back in later. Brian and Tori were planning to scare Cassie and Matt with a prank, one that would play out like the scene straight from a horror movie. Instead of going to the movie theatre, Brian and Tori parked the car a distance away from the house and snuck back in through the unlocked basement door. Only this time, they were wearing black clothing and frightening masks that they had made for the occasion. They were also carrying multiple knives that an older friend had purchased for them at a pawn shop. In the basement, Brian and Tori found the circuit breaker box and cut the power while Cassie and Matt were upstairs in the living room watching television. As they waited for someone to come downstairs to investigate, Tori received a call from Matt telling him not to come back to the house since he was leaving to spend the rest of the night with his family. After Matt left the house, Brian slammed one of the basement doors in order to scare Cassie. She screamed, "Who's there?" but no one came down to the basement, so they went upstairs where they found her on the living room couch. Through his tears, Brian recounted how Cassie screamed as Tori began to stab her in the chest and back over and over. As she lay on the floor, bleeding and breathing heavily, Brian yelled to Tori, "What are you doing?" And Tori in turn said he had to kill her. Brian maintained that he had no hand in stabbing Cassie, thinking the whole time that this was just a joke scare. He said that earlier in the day he told Tori that they needed to tell the truth about what happened, but Tori threatened to kill him if he did. During his confession, Brian told the investigators that they disposed of all the items used in Cassie's killing. He agreed to take them to the exact spot they were buried. With Brian's father accompanying him, they drove to Black Rock Canyon, a vast recreational area of trails and camping grounds located roughly 16 miles southeast from the house on Whispering Cliffs. Led by Brian, they walked through the dusty grasses and low-lying shrubs of canyon until they got to a bit of earth that looked recently disturbed. There, Detectives Thomas and Gansky uncovered all the evidence that was missing at the scene of the crime. It included 2 dagger-style knives with their own sheaths, a non-serrated Shane Sloan knife with a silver and black handle, a folding knife with a serrated portion near its silver and black handle resembling a survival knife, a box of stick matches, a melted brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide, a pair of blue latex gloves, a blue plastic garbage bag, a small piece of black cord, a pair of fingerless gloves by Athletic Works, a pair of black gloves by Puma, a single black glove, a black Calvin Klein dress shirt, a partially buried black Haggard dress shirt, a pair of black boots, a white and grey sock. The masks were also found. One was white with a blood spatter design painted around its eyes and mouth. The other was multicoloured, white, black and pink, and partially melted. Notebook paper with handwriting and pencil was among the evidence as well. Only single phrases stood out in what remained of the partially buried notes. Quote, "Home alone, runs into Tori, murder Cassie, Brian kills, on the back porch, Brian chases her, kill Matt." End quote. It was clear what the boys' plans were the night they visited Cassie as she house sat. Tori would eventually admit to the handwriting being his own. A Sony home videotape was also found among the evidence, though neither Brian or Tori made any mention of it during their multiple interrogations. The tape was damaged to the point that it was unplayable, but the film was later repaired and straightened. The recovered footage skipped around, but when reviewed in chronological order, what emerged was a chronicle of 2 teens' murderous plans taking shape over a couple of days leading up to Cassie's killing. Most of the footage took place in Tori's car as he and Brian drove through the streets of Pocatello, with Brian holding the camera and doing most of the talking. On Thursday, September 21st, 2006, the night before Cassie's death, the boys recorded a series of conversations between them as they drove in the rain. They talked about how murder shouldn't be against the law and mentioned classmates they'd planned to kill if they found them home alone. They talked about killing Cassie at her own house while Matt was there and then killing Matt when he came out to investigate. Some 20 minutes later, they talk about killing her at her aunt and uncle's house.
We found our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddart. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get? I mean, like, holy shit, dude.
I'm horny just thinking about it.
Hell yeah.
Hey friends of the show, sorry for a pause in the story, but just a quick reminder to let you know how you can help support the show by becoming a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/truecrimegrapple, and for $1 US a month you can get a shout out on the show with the assault tier. For $5 a month there is the murder tier, where we'll have early episodes up every so often and we'll have some bonus content coming your way. So check it out. That's patreon.com/truecrimegrapple. Any donation is greatly appreciated and welcomed. Once again, patreon.com/truecrimegrapple. Many thanks. Later in the recording, they talked about going down in history and being just like the horror movie Scream, except in real life. They aspired to be murderers like Ed Gein and called Ted Bundy, the Hillside Strangler and the Zodiac Killer amateurs. They ended the recording saying that murder was power. Murder was freedom. According to the videotape, Brian began the next morning filming Cassie at her locker. It was Friday, September 22nd, and he knew that Cassie would be at her aunt and uncle's house in the next few hours. By 12 noon, he and Tori were in the library skipping their 4th-hour class and writing what Tori called their death list. They referred to 10 or so times that they had planned to kill someone, only for the plans to fall through because the would-be victims weren't home alone. The next time they recorded was later that night at 9:53 p.m. They sat in Tori's car listening to Pink Floyd after leaving Cassie and Matt at her aunt's house.
It was 9:50, September 22nd, 2006. We know there's lots of doors. There's lots of places to hide. I unlocked the back doors. That's all unlocked. Now we just gotta wait.
That same night, just after 11:30 p.m, Brian and Tori's final recording took place.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. Oh, fuck. That felt like it wasn't real. I mean, it went by so fast.
Shut the fuck up. We gotta get our act straight.
Okay.
On Wednesday, September 27, 2006, just 5 days after the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart, Brian Lee Draper and Tori Michael Adamcik were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder as adults. Brian spent that night at the Bannock County Jail. The next day, he was compliant and accepted another interview after being given his Miranda rights. In Brian's first confession, he had claimed to be in the same room as Tori when Cassie was attacked, but that he never laid a hand on her. In his latest interview, after an investigator asked him if he stabbed Cassie because he feared repercussions from Tori if he were to disobey him, he nodded yes. Brian said that he stabbed Stoddart 4 times, in her leg and chest. Tori encouraged Brian to stab her, and when Brian stabbed her in the leg, Tori told him, quote, "It's not going to work. She has to die." Before his arrest, Tori had been given another interview. He maintained his story about leaving Cassie and Matt around 10 p.m. to break into cars with Brian. While scoping them out, there was an exchange of phone calls between him and Matt, with the last call regarding Matt's change of plans. By 11:30 p.m, around the same time that Matt left with his mother and father that night, Tori said that he and Brian went back to the house where they stayed for the rest of the night. When Gansky informed him that witness accounts placed the 2 boys at the convenience store around that time, Tori said that it was just to get matches for Brian's cigarettes. Eventually, the detectives told Tori that they had the items that were buried at Black Rock Canyon and pressed him to be truthful. When they tried to question him further, Tori asked for an attorney and was placed under arrest. Tori and Brian's bond was originally set at $1 million, but after the videotape's existence was confirmed by the Bannock County prosecutor, it was revoked. Tori Adamcik and Brian Draper were separately tried back-to-back as adults. Both pleaded not guilty, equally denying culpability in Cassie's death as they continuously blamed the other for a prank gone wrong. While Brian eventually conceded that he did stab Cassie, but only under threat by Tori Tori insisted that he never stabbed Cassie and in fact had left the room as Draper was attacking her. Throughout the court proceedings, as the prosecution exposed them and their family defended them, many of the details of the boys' personal lives would come together and build a picture of the events that led up to Cassie's death. Tori and Brian both seemed to be normal 16-year-old boys who grew up in respectable middle-class homes with parents who were caring and supportive. Neither of them was a troublemaker in or out of school, and neither had even had ever so much as school detention. Brian Lee Draper was born on March 21st, 1990. He spent a majority of his childhood in the state of Utah, but he and his family had recently moved to Pocatello, where he attended Pocatello High School. As family members claimed, Brian was affectionate and kind. He was intelligent and at just 11 years old won an Intel Science Award over hundreds of other contestants. He was a talented soccer player and loved music, having a special interest in playing piano and drums. Brian also exhibited a stutter throughout his life, and years of teasing by his peers had led to a deep depressive state and sense of alienation, as well as a hypersensitivity to ridicule and criticism. Tori Michael Adamcik was born on June 14, 1990, into a tightly knit family of 5. According to his mother, he was fun-loving and sociable. Tori was a fan of music, drawing and video games, but his greatest passion was film, with his favourite genre being horror. Tori's aspirations to go into film school and become a director were obvious at a young age. Transforming the images in his head into something tangible was second nature to him, as he and his friends dressed in costumes and masks to act out horror scenes in front of a home video camera. When Brian and Tori met in the summer of 2006, they became fast friends. In some ways, they were markedly different, mainly in how they got on with others at school. Tori had grown up in Pocatello and was more popular. He grew up with friends coming and going from his home and looked to have little trouble socialising. Brian, however, was much more introverted. The feeling that he didn't fit in with his peers was amplified as the move to Pocatello pushed him into an unfamiliar world where friendships had already been forged within an established pecking order. Despite that difference, what counted between Brian and Tori were the things they had in common. Both had a deep interest in films, especially horror films. They both enjoyed making movies and would often record the goings-on in their daily lives, both with each other and with other students. They had a general fascination for the darker, more violent elements of life. Serial killers and mass murder were subjects that piqued their interest. Brian's own obsession with violence dated as far back as the 7th grade, though there had been no personal history of violence in his life. They also had at least 2 mutual friends, Matt Beckham and his girlfriend Cassie Jo Stoddart. Tori and Matt had already been friends, and Brian got to know Cassie more through a class they shared together. She was a nice person, and they got along as they joked around during lessons. It wasn't long before Brian began to secretly have feelings for Cassie, but she didn't seem to show the same interest in him. When she began dating Matt, the inner voice that often whispered to Brian that he was a loser resounded in his head. Brian and Tori had another mutual interest. For different reasons, they both desired recognition. Tori through the world of horror films. Though he loved 80s films like The Howling, he seemed to be especially influenced by Scream, a 1996 movie that has been said to have revitalised and reinvented the horror genre in the 90s with its self-referential style and its social commentary. It was a movie that removed the power to take life out of the hands of an inaccessible, almost immortal entity like Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger and placed it in the hands of an average person. In the case of Scream, a couple typical teenagers. Brian's need to be acknowledged was fueled by the failed acceptance by his peers. He felt like a nobody, yet wanted to at least have a sense of identity or belonging. By the time he was a junior at Pocatello High School, he had begun to identify with and even idolise Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the perpetrators of the 1999 Columbine High School shooting massacre that claimed 13 lives in Colorado. He admired the two for gaining national recognition as misfits who took revenge on a student body that didn't care to accept or acknowledge them. Over the 6 short weeks that they knew each other before Cassie's murder, the boys began to spend more and more time together. As Brian's friends stopped coming around, his parents grew concerned with the closeness of his friendship with Tori. Together, they fed off each other's obsessions and applauded each other's lack of conscience, creating a world where their violent fantasies could become a reality. Infamy was just as good as fame. The possibility of committing murder started to become an imperative, and the question changed from if to when, how, and whom. Tori often talked about the movie Scream, which had a scene where the killer wearing a black robe and a white mask kills a babysitter after calling her from within the house. Tori thought it would be cool to commit a murder in a similar fashion. Brian, on the other hand, thought it would be equally cool to partake in a mass murder similar to the Columbine shooting. Tori didn't seem as interested in the latter as Brian, but this was the closest that Brian felt to belonging to a group. So Scream it was to be. The video evidence of the boys' conversations were shown in court. At times flippant and at other times enthusiastic, their comments ranged from talk of good and evil and their plans to upstage past prolific serial killers. Half-hearted apologies were sprinkled in as they revealed the idea of killing multiple classmates, including Cassie and Matt. In the final bit of footage recorded, they had already killed Cassie and were on their way to buy movie tickets to establish their alibi. It was chilling and disturbing to hear, but it was also integral to proving that both Tori and Brian were equally culpable in Cassie's death, despite their claims that the other was responsible. This hadn't been a prank gone wrong, and neither boy was an innocent bystander. And as the jurors listened to the testimony describing Cassie's wounds, the prosecution hoped that that would be made clear. On September 25, 2006, forensic pathologist Dr. Steve Skumal had conducted an autopsy on Cassie's body. He found that Cassie had been stabbed approximately 30 times, almost all concentrated in the chest, neck and back area. 11 to 12 of the wounds had been potentially fatal, with the cause of Cassie's death being stab wounds to the trunk. During a cross-examination by Tori's defence attorney, Skumal stated that not only could he not identify a killer based on his autopsy, he couldn't say with certainty what object or objects were used to stab Cassie. Dr. Garrison, who had previously performed autopsies for the Bannock County coroner, was called in to perform a second examination of the body on September 28th, 3 days after the Skumal autopsy. Each wound showed that one side of the murder weapon was blunt, while the other side was sharp, demonstrating a profile consistent with that of a single-bladed knife. He believed that not only were knives used to kill Cassie, but at least 2 knives had been used. This was a significant piece of evidence that showed jurors that neither of the boys had acted alone. In a slideshow he created for the jurors, Dr. Garrison showed what he maintained was evidence that a serrated, survival-type knife, referred to in the trial as the Rambo knife, was used, as well as a non-serrated knife referred to as the Sloan blade. The serrated knife had inflicted the most damage, contributing to 11 of the 12 possible fatal wounds. The non-serrated knife had inflicted only one of the potentially fatal wounds, along with those that were non-fatal. It had entered Cassie's heart and struck the right ventricle. Among the non-fatal injuries, one of Cassie's fingers was nearly completely severed, presumably as she attempted to fend off the attack. Cynthia Hall, a forensic scientist with the Idaho State Police who ran DNA tests on the items found at Black Rock Canyon, took the stand to testify. The survival-style partly serrated folding knife was found to have Cassie's blood on it. One of the gloves was soaked through with her blood, and a drop of it was also found on the cuff of the Calvin Klein shirt. The white mask with the blood splatter design contained the partial DNA profile of Tori Adamcik. While Brian's attorneys were quick to point out that his DNA wasn't found among the Black Rock Canyon evidence, it was found under Cassie's fingernails, confirming some evidence of a struggle between them. More and more items collected during a search had shown just how dark the teens' inner worlds were. Tori's artistic streak manifested itself in disturbing drawings of murder weapons and violent figures. A list of supplies that they would need to commit murder was also found. There were obvious plans to commit mass murder among some of the belongings. It had already been seen that the earliest recorded exchange between Tori and Brian alluded to a school shooting, with their goal being a high death count. Among related writings was a list of potential victims, as well as an 8,000-word story by Brian called Black River. In it was a plan to perpetrate a mass shooting at Pocatello High School that they hoped to carry out 2 weeks after Cassie was to die. It was the opinion of many people involved in the case that Tori and Brian would have had no qualms about killing in cold blood again and again. On Tuesday, April 17th, 2007, the jury found Brian Lee Draper guilty of both first-degree murder and the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. On Friday, June 8th, 2007, the jury found Tori Michael Adamcik guilty of the same. As 6th District Judge Peter McDermott read out Brian and Tori's verdict, tears came from the family members and the jurors. On August 21st, 2007, Tori and Brian received their sentences as passed down by Judge McDermott. Both got mandatory sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. For conspiracy to commit murder, they received an additional sentence of 30 years to life. After sentencing, the boys were transported from the Bannock County Courthouse to the Idaho State Correctional Institution just south of Boise, Idaho, near Kuna in unincorporated Ada County. The convoy consisted of a prison van and a police vehicle and was led by Lieutenant K.G. Fonsbeck of the Bannock County Sheriff's Office, along with 3 other law enforcement officers. Though they could have been given separate transport, they insisted to share a ride from the courthouse to the prison. They had socialised very little if anyone throughout the year's legal proceedings, and the ride gave them the opportunity to reunite and talk. Despite pointing fingers at one another for Cassie's murder during the trial, they bore each other no ill will. Their conversation would take them from joking around to discussing religion to reflecting on their own fates and how their actions had led them there. They also joked with Lieutenant Fonsbeck on the drive to the prison, asking to be let go as they were just a couple of stupid kids. He recalled them getting more nervous as they got visibly closer to the building, and that the reality of what was happening was beginning to set in for them. Since his incarceration, Brian has shown his remorse publicly in interviews and has come to fully accept his role in the murder of his friend Cassie. On the wall of his prison cell, he's left a reminder of his heinous act, scrawling, quote, "Rest in peace, Cassie. I love you. Please forgive me." After a short while in Boise, Tori was transported to the Idaho Correctional Institution in Orofino, Idaho, over 250 miles north of Boise. He's maintained that he was a victim of circumstances, being unfairly punished for a crime perpetrated by another. His mother, Shannon Adamcik, wrote a book, The Guilty Innocent, where she writes as a mother coping with her minor son, innocent of a murder, yet tried as an adult and sentenced to a life languishing in prison. Both the Adamciks and Drapers moved from Pocatello to be closer to their sons and have continued to support them and fight for them through multiple attempts to appeal their sentences. In April 2011, Brian Draper sought to have his conviction vacated or to be given a limited life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. In a 3-2 decision, Brian's appeal for possible parole was denied. However, his conviction on conspiracy to commit first-degree murder was vacated. In July 2015, Tori gained a hearing following a post-conviction relief appeal with State 6th District Magistrate Judge Michael W. Brown presiding. The attorney who represented Tori during his 2007 trial never called character witnesses, which could have affected his sentencing, because Bannock County Prosecutor Mark Heidman would have had otherwise presented a disc of files downloaded from the Adamcik family computer depicting animal cruelty, child pornography, and other violent images such as a pentagram etched into bloody flesh. While on the stand, Tori had said, quote, "I never wanted it to happen. I want to apologise to Cassie's family." Judge Brown denied Tori's request in March 2016. Upon an appeal of Judge Brown's decision, Tori received a hearing held by the Idaho Supreme Court in November 2017. The following month, the court rejected his appeal, upholding the district court's decision. Over the course of Brian and Tori's sentences, 2 US Supreme Court rulings would have had a major effect on minors who were tried as adults. In 2012, Miller v. Alabama made it unconstitutional to give a mandatory life sentence to a juvenile offender without the possibility of parole, even in the case of murder convictions. It was imperative that the relatively young age of the offender be taken into consideration. In 2016, Montgomery v. Louisiana has required that the 2012 ruling be applied to previous cases, necessitating a review of mitigating factors in as many as 1,500 juvenile convictions across the country. In January 2018, Tory filed a federal right of habeas corpus, claiming that the state Supreme Court denied his first appeal based on a theory that hadn't been presented to the jurors. He also argues that he should be given a new sentencing per the Miller and Montgomery rulings. A federal magistrate judge is in the midst of determining whether the right should be issued. In 2010, Cassie Jo Stoddart's family had filed a lawsuit against the Idaho school district. They claimed that the school should have been aware that Brian Draper and Tori Adamcik were a potential threat to others. The case was dismissed by the state Supreme Court, maintaining that the school district was not at fault because the boys' actions could not be foreseen. For Cassie's loved ones, every September brings a struggle as they deal with the anniversary of her death. They disapprove of the continued attempts of Tori or Brian to appeal their convictions. Every new appeal brings the family back into the courthouse to hear the events of Cassie's death. Every new apology brings a reopening of old wounds already slow to heal. The only silver lining for Cassie's family members is the knowledge that our killers have been brought to justice. Cassie's mother Anna had the opportunity to appear in a Dr. Phil episode with Tori Adamcik's mother Shannon, but she turned down the offer. After Cassie was buried, she would go out nearly every day and visit her grave, hoping to find solace in a poem etched in the back that anticipates an eventual reunion with those who went before us. All Cassie's family can do in the meantime is to continue on with their lives, keeping only the best parts of her memory alive along the way. Brian Draper has a few vivid memories of the murder itself. He only remembers the event as it comes to him in flashbulb images, one of blood and heavy breathing, another of Cassie's eyes open as she looked off into the distance. Brian remembers that on the night of her murder, the reality was that Cassie only screamed before he and Tori attacked her. But in the flashing images in his mind, she's still screaming. Alright, you legends, that is episode 24 in the books. Big thanks to Lauren for her hard work on getting this episode together and the great job she did. Remember, if you want to discuss this or any of our other episodes, you can join us on our social media. Keep sharing and telling people about the show, and let's keep growing. By the time you hear this, we probably have hit 20,000 downloads. In fact, I'm sure we will do. Last time I checked, we were extremely close. So that's unbelievable. 20,000 downloads for this little small show. Let's keep it going. I'm greedy. I want 1 million. You'll be hearing from me in 2 weeks as we return for the next instalment of the True Crime Grapple Show, which will be episode 25. Until then, I've been your host Dan. Stay safe out there.